Cervantes wrote, "The road is always better than the inn." You're on the road again. Do you agree with Cervantes and what you have learned giving these talks?
Boy, that's a good question. I wish I could give a gold star to the person who asked that question. The road is always better than the inn. Oh man, that's such a great line. Okay. So Dostoevsky wrote a very famous book called Notes from Underground, and in Dostoevsky was an absolute prophet. Like Nietzsche, he could see way down into the structure of things, and he knew what was about to happen. He predicted the catastrophe of the communist revolution like 60 years before it happened, which is it's absolutely unimaginable feat. He did that in a book called The Devils or The Possessed, and in many of his other books as well, not least in Notes from Underground. He was commenting on this building that was erected in London at the world's at the I think it was late 1800s World Exhibition. They built the first modern glass and steel building. It was called something like the Palace of Crystal, and it was a vision of a kind of technological material utopia. And Dostoevsky got wind of this, and the utopian schemes that lay underneath it, that turned our cities into modern day wastelands, by the way, the modern day wastelands of uniform glass and steel. And he started to think deeply about the utopian offering. So imagine that you just had whatever you need. That's the Marxist dream, I suppose. What do you need? Well, Dostoevsky thought, well, what are our basic requirements fundamentally? He said, well, imagine that you set up a situation, and I think he was speaking of California, where all you had to do was sit in pools of bubbling hot water and eat sweet cakes and busy yourself with the propagation of the species. And that does sound a lot like Hollywood. And would that suffice? Now you'd think, well, that in some way that is everything I need, or maybe in some sense even everything I desire. So what's the problem with that? Well, Dostoevsky said, well, one of the problems is that people are basically insane and in a very curious way, and they'll break things into bits even if they're good just because they want something interesting to happen. And so if you provided a group of people with this garden of hedonistic delights, it would take no time at all until they smashed it into pieces, just so they could squabble interestingly among the ruins and curse. And that's very funny and very accurate, and that was Dostoevsky's observation, and that was a devastating critique of the presumptions of materialist utopians. And the reason for that is that's not what we want, and the reason for that is we're not overgrown infants. And that's an infantile vision of paradise. You can just lay there. Someone will change your diapers because you don't want to have all of the inconvenience of actually having to move, when an intravenous flow into your veins could provide you with everything you need. Maybe you don't even have to be conscious. Well, is that what you want? Well, if that isn't what you want, what do you want? How about the great adventure of your life? How about that? In the story of Abraham, Abraham is an overgrown infant. He's a failure to launch. He's like 70-something years old. He lives in his dad's tent or his mother's basement. And, you know, he's got food, he's got grapes, he's got slave girls, or pornography. He's got everything he needs at hand. He's got privilege. And it's undeserved, but there's no need for him to do anything. So what does he lack? How about the need to do something? How about that? How about that's the need that becomes paramount in the land of material plenty? The call to adventure. Well, and that's what comes to Abraham. That's what comes to Abraham. That's how God is defined as how God is defined in the story of Abraham. The biblical corpus is a sequence of stories that contain within them a definition of God. And so you might say, one manner that you could conceptualize God is God is the manifestation of the Spirit within that calls you to broaden yourself in the struggle with life. It's a definition. Do you understand? It's not a proclamation of faith. It's a definition of the highest possible aspiration. Well, now then you ask yourself this. Do you believe in the existence of a spirit that calls you to adventure? Well, if you pursue adventure, then yes. Ask yourself this then. If you devoted yourself to nothing but that pursuit, wholeheartedly and with full faith, how great an adventure could you have? Well, that's what God offers Abraham. And Abraham says, I'm in no matter what. And God says, okay then, how about if I call upon you to sacrifice your son? And Abraham says, I'm all in, no matter what. And that's the ultimate statement of faith. And it's a necessary statement because whether you like it or not, you are all in no matter what. And you can either do that in the most noble possible manner, or you can do it as a second rater. And those are your options. And if you do it as a second rater, all that means is that you have faith in being second rate. And good luck with that. And I would say that too, good luck with that. And why? Because life is far too brutal, far too overwhelming, far too magnificent, far too demanding for you to master it without committing, sacrificing the very best within you. And then you might ask yourself too, life is a veil of suffering. Maybe it's because you don't make the right sacrifices. Now, let's think that through for a minute. When you look back in your life and you're happy with yourself, I don't mean prideful, I don't mean puffed out. Maybe you don't even discuss this with anybody. I mean when you're having a colloquy with your conscience and you're trying to decide if there's anything within you of redeeming value whatsoever. What might you point to? How about a time in your past where you encountered something remarkably difficult and managed it with dignity, grace, and productive generosity? Even once or twice when you stepped out of your way to do something for someone else, not to gain the credit, the public credit in relationship to your reputation for doing so, but because you were moved by the Spirit that pushed you to extend yourself beyond your limits. That contemplation of those acts can get you through a very dark time. Well, what if your life was made of nothing but those acts? Maybe there would be no truly dark times. Maybe you would be able to construe whatever came your way, no matter how horrific, as an immense dragon with a commensurate potential reward. That's what happens in the story of Job. Job is tortured almost to the same degree as Christ. And Job's insistence during his torment is, no matter what happens to me, I will not lose faith. And that's a decision. It's a proclamation, right? It's an orientation. And the orientation is, beset by catastrophe though I may be, I will maintain faith in the fundamental goodness of being and myself. And I will act in accordance with that proposition. And I will take whatever comes my way in consequence of that faith. In dire straits, one faith or another will move you forward. The traditional injunction is to maintain your faith in the ultimate goodness of being, becoming, and the human soul. And that's why the road is better than the inn, because we're not built for comfort. We're built for adventure. We're built for the adventure of the truth, to be more precise. So that's that.